At 57, Julia Roberts remains one of the most recognizable and beloved faces Hollywood has ever known. Her smile once graced every magazine cover, her voice became an anthem for romantic dreams, and her roles defined entire eras of film history. She captured the hearts of millions not simply with beauty, but with a charisma so disarming it felt personal. She was not just America's sweetheart, she was our sweetheart. Someone whose joy became our favorite escape, whose laughter rewrote the ending of every bitter love story we chose to forget. But behind the designer gowns, the Oscar speeches, and the billion-dollar box office numbers lies a woman whose path was woven with silent sorrow and losses too tender to name aloud. This is not the kind of story told on red carpets or in interviews. It's the kind found in the quiet between takes, when the cameras aren't rolling, when the laughter fades. It's what the tabloids never captured, and what most fans never saw. For all her fame, Julia Roberts is someone who learned to survive not just the brutality of the industry, but the unspeakable ache of an unresolved childhood, the crushing loneliness of public heartbreaks, and the endless balancing act of being adored by the world while searching for someone who would simply choose her, without expectations, without a spotlight. For every iconic role, be it Vivian in Pretty Woman, Erin in Erin Brockovich, or Anna Scott in Notting Hill, there exists a deeper untold version of Julia. Not the actress, not the star, but the fragile girl from Smyrna, Georgia, who grew up catching her breath between her mother's angry outbursts and her stuttering silences. That girl would one day become the most powerful woman in Hollywood, but she would never fully escape the shadow of those early wounds. The irony is almost cruel. The woman known for her laugh built her life on the bruises she never fully healed. Born on October 28, 1967, Julia Fiona Roberts came into a world already woven with contradictions. Her parents were artists, actors and dreamers, who dared to open an integrated theater school in the segregated South, a radical act that earned them the admiration of civil rights leaders like Coretta Scott King, who even helped pay Julia's hospital bill when she was born. But inside their home, things were far less inspiring. Money was tight, tempers were short, and by the time Julia was 4 years old, her parents' marriage had collapsed into dust. Her father, the gentle one, moved out. Her mother remarried a man whose anger filled their house like smoke, invisible but choking. As a child, Julia struggled not just with the emotional instability around her, but with a stutter that seemed to lock her inner world behind trembling lips. Teachers noticed the quiet girl in oversized sweaters, who rarely raised her hand, and never quite met your eyes. Words caught like stones in her throat. Her voice lived inside her, barely reaching the surface. But even then, in the ache of childhood confusion and nightly tears, something began to grow in her, a seed of resilience not taught, only earned. When Julia was just 10 years old, life delivered the blow she never fully recovered from. Her father, Walter, her safety, her softness, her compass, died of throat cancer, leaving behind only silence and heartbreak. He'd hidden the sickness, shielded her from the truth, wanted to protect her from grief. But when he was gone, all that remained was an empty chair, a house too quiet, and a daughter frozen by loss. He left her cassette tapes, gentle bedtime stories he recorded for her before he passed, his voice becoming the lullaby to a childhood already crumbling. Julia listened to them every night until the tapes wore out completely, until even his voice had vanished. How do you move forward when memory becomes your only form of contact with love? What followed was a teenagehood of emotional hunger and real physical hardship. Her home was turbulent, her stepfather's presence was weighty, at times frightening. Police were called. Arguments cracked like thunder through thin walls. She and her siblings, including actor Eric Roberts, tiptoed through their own lives trying to avoid anything that might set the storm off. It was not a home for dreams, and yet that's where one began. The tragedy of Julia Roberts is not just in her past, it's in the painful way she learned to transmute grief into gold. Before she was a star, she was a girl walking snow-covered streets with holes in her shoes, an acting resume thinner than her winter coat, with only one truth beating in her heart: I will survive this. She wasn't handed a break. She earned it with trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks. New York City has always been known to test the promise in people's hearts. For Julia, it was merciless. At 17 she arrived with nothing but a second-hand suitcase, a couple $100, and a dream so fragile it could shatter with a single rejection. And rejection came often. Casting directors didn't look twice. Modeling agencies told her she was too toothy, too awkward, too ordinary for stardom. Her laugh, that uncontainable burst of joy that would one day become her trademark, was treated like a flaw. She walked miles in snow because she couldn't afford the subway. $8 pizza slices and watered-down soup just to stretch her savings. Nights in barely heated apartments left her shivering beneath borrowed blankets, using her father's old voice recorder not for comfort, but for courage. And still she went on. Most people break under that kind of pressure. But Julia Roberts didn't break. She bent. Like the strong trees Georgia winds had once whipped through her childhood backyard. She swayed but never snapped. She auditioned again. She kept acting. Waiting tables when she had to, accepting one-line roles just to inch forward. Her first small break came in the form of a Clarisil commercial, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but enough to earn her a union card. And that card, it felt like a magic key, a doorway she wasn't born into, but one she had kicked open on her own. Things moved faster after that, but not easier. In one of her earliest TV roles, a minor part in Crime Story, she showed up to set with a fever over 100 degrees. She worked through it. On another project, a pyrotechnic miscue left her with burns. All of it she absorbed. Because when your childhood prepares you for pain, you don't fear it. You carry it like armor. When Mystic Pizza released in 1988, critics said she had something, not just beauty but energy. Presence, that elusive thing that blurs the line between talent and destiny. But behind the millions who began falling in love with her magnetic screen persona was a young woman still haunted by absence. Her father's death was still a knife that twisted in her moments of silence. Her stutter had faded, but the habit of bottling pain never left. And then came Steel Magnolias, the film that would test her both on camera and off. Cast alongside legends like Sally Field and Shirley MacLaine, Julia stood out. Her character Shelby was frail, battling illness with quiet strength, the very duality Julia knew all too well. Off-screen she collapsed in exhaustion between takes. The pressure, from co-stars, from herself, from the public's growing expectations, was crushing. She was 22, and learning hard that talent wasn't enough. You had to survive the noise that came with it. But her performance struck a nerve. Shelby wasn't just a character. Shelby was Julia, the girl who had suffered in silence and decided kindness would be her rebellion. For it she earned her first Golden Globe, and an Academy Award nomination. Triumph, yes, but still just the beginning. The world saw her as success incarnate, a goddess rising in a male-dominated industry. Magazine covers couldn't get enough. Her every move was dissected. Fans saw her smile, her charm, her seeming ease with everything. But Julia knew better than anyone. Fame gives, and it also takes. And it took. Behind every flashbulb, every autograph, was a young woman overwhelmed. Her private life became public property. Paparazzi swarmed her relationships. Heartbreak played out weekly in tabloids. An engagement to Dylan McDermott faded under the unrelenting weight of attention. The kind of love Julia longed for, soft, safe, quiet, was drowned out by headlines and speculation. She once said, "Sometimes in the places I should feel most seen, I feel invisible." That quote never made it to press, but it revealed something the world rarely stopped to consider. Julia Roberts wasn't basking in light. She was often burning beneath it. Her entire life had been a balancing act, between the roles she played and the reality she lived. Stardom promised joy, but Julia didn't want a castle made of applause. She wanted a home where no one asked her to perform. Still, she smiled. She dove into roles that demanded more of her soul than her surface. Each character became both escape and excavation, a way to understand her own broken parts. Sleeping with the Enemy, Dying Young, Hook, none of them were just film credits. They were brushstrokes on the canvas of a woman still figuring out where her own story was going. And maybe that's what made people love her. Not just the charm or the beauty or the laugh, but the way she seemed to carry something invisible behind her eyes. A knowing, an ache, a kind of truth that made people feel less alone. And yet the heart of her tragedy was just beginning. When Pretty Woman hit theaters in 1990, Julia Roberts didn't just become a movie star, she became a phenomenon. The film was never meant to be a fairy tale. Originally titled 3000, the script was written as a dark exploration of transactional relationships and emotional bankruptcy. But somewhere during pre-production, the tone shifted. The grit gave way to glitter, and in the center of this transformation stood Julia Roberts, radiant, untested, and unknowingly about to change Hollywood forever. She wasn't the first choice for the role of Vivian Ward. She wasn't even the second. But she walked into that audition room wide-eyed and nervous, and when she smiled, everything shifted. It wasn't the beauty alone, it wasn't the laugh, it was something else, the aching vulnerability under the surface. The part felt written for her, even though it wasn't. Production was rocky. The original studio folded. Casting decisions kept changing. Julia's place in the film was never guaranteed. Even her soon-to-be co-star Richard Gere almost walked away. But the story goes that in their final meeting, Julia scribbled a note and passed it to him under the table. "Please say yes." He did. And the rest became cultural memory. The crimson dress, the necklace snap, the bathtub scene, the elevator laughter. These weren't just movie moments. They were stitched into the fabric of pop culture. And at the center of it all was a 23-year-old woman suddenly shouldering the weight of an entire industry's expectations. Her paycheck was a fraction of what Gere received. Yet it was her face, not his, that lit up the poster, drew audiences in, and lingered longest after the credits rolled. The film exploded, pulling in hundreds of millions worldwide. But as Vivian Ward's glass slipper fit perfectly on screen, Julia Roberts' real-life shoes were beginning to twist and pinch. Her fame exploded so fast, so loud, that nothing in her life felt grounded anymore. Every relationship became fair game to the media. Every tear she shed was snapped at 10 angles. Every person who loved her suddenly had to compete with the public's version of who she was. That's when Dylan McDermott, the man she became engaged to after Steel Magnolias, quietly slipped out of her life. She never spoke much about it. Only that sometimes love can't grow when it's under constant interrogation. They hadn't just broken up, they'd been broken apart by something bigger than either of them, America's obsession with Julia Roberts. A few years later, another romance ignited, this time with actor Kiefer Sutherland. The headlines branded them Hollywood's newest it couple, beautiful, electric, destined. The wedding plans were set, the dress designed, invitations mailed. People were already calling it the event that would stop Hollywood. But just 3 days before the ceremony, Julia walked away. No explanation, no press conference, just silence. The tabloids exploded. Rumors of Kiefer's alleged infidelity, whispers of cold feet. But Julia kept quiet. The woman known for her brightness receded into shadow, leaving behind a cancelled altar, unused flowers, and a lot of speculation. Years later, when asked about that decision, Julia would only say, "Walking away was the bravest thing I've ever done." And that was all. No blame. No bitterness. Just the kind of heartbreak you carry alone so the world won't twist it into spectacle. She escaped, quite literally. Fled the media storm with Kiefer's friend Jason Patrick. It wasn't a romance. Not really. Just two battered souls sharing space in the storm's eye. She needed peace, and for a while, he helped her find some. But nothing in her life was ever truly quiet again. By the time she returned to the public eye, Julia Roberts was no longer just a breakout star. She was a household name, a bankable icon. The studio system bent around her. Her laugh could greenlight a project. Her poster could open a film. But within her, something had shifted. The smile was still there, wide, dazzling, but the sparkle behind it had changed. Where there once was youthful hope, now lived experience. Weight, weariness, wisdom won too early. Fame had given her everything she'd dreamed of, but it had taken just as much, maybe more. Her next roles reflected it, darker, more complicated, more wounded. In Sleeping with the Enemy, she played a wife escaping abuse. In Dying Young, a woman learning to live while preparing to die. These characters fit her differently. They wore grief like silk. They loved with one foot, always bracing for release, and audiences couldn't look away, because they saw something in Julia now they hadn't before. Not just charm, but gravity. Not just joy, but sorrow. She had always been luminous, but now she was something rarer, a star who wasn't pretending she had it all figured out. and that's what made us love her even more. By the mid-1990s, Julia Roberts was no longer chasing roles, the roles were chasing her. She had become the crown jewel of romantic comedy. With My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, and Runaway Bride, she didn't just play the lead, she was the genre. Studios banked on her smile like a guaranteed return. Directors trusted her instincts beyond the script, and audiences, well, they followed her anywhere. But Julia's tragedy never lay in her failure, it lived in her success. The characters she played often yearned for love, sought safety, dreamt of being truly known, and the audience forgot, or perhaps never knew, that Julia Roberts yearned for the very same things off-screen, that the woman playing the bride most likely to run, was in truth, someone who didn't want to run at all. She just couldn't find anywhere safe enough to stay. She longed for more than applause. She longed for home. That longing echoed in her work in ways critics never fully gave credit for. In Notting Hill, her character, a world-famous actress who falls for an average man, wasn't just fiction, it was a mirror. Julia too knew what it meant to be adored by millions yet go home to emptiness. She too knew how love could wither under the gaze of fame. Despite the glamour and the gowns, her emotional isolation deepened. The very thing that made her famous, her relatability, had paradoxically separated her from any real sense of belonging. When everyone believes they know you, how does anyone truly love you? And then in the year 2000, came a role that didn't just change her career, it changed the landscape of Hollywood. Erin Brockovich, a single mother, broke, angry, unapologetically fierce, and real. Julia didn't just portray Erin, she embodied her. The sass, the pain, the toughness born from desperation. It was a revelation. Stripped of glam, showcased in jeans and attitude, she became something rarely seen in mainstream cinema at the time. A woman who wielded truth like a weapon, who suffered out loud, and who didn't shrink just because a system told her to. The performance earned her an Academy Award, but the pay she received, $20 million, was the line in the sand. She became the first woman in history to command that sum for a single film. She shattered the glass ceiling not with a whisper, but with a battle cry. That paycheck wasn't just a figure, it was a declaration that women, and Julia Roberts, were done being paid in smiles and spotlight alone. And while the world celebrated, Julia retreated, because somewhere beneath the awards and the accolades, there was a woman who had been performing for far too long, and she was tired. She once said, "I've never been afraid of being alone, I've been afraid of being surrounded, and still feeling lonely." That's the kind of ache you can't fix with success. In 1993, Julia shocked the industry by marrying country singer Lyle Lovett in a sudden quiet ceremony. It was fast, unconventional, even strange to outsiders. But to Julia it was perhaps an attempt at normalcy, to do something hers away from fanfare, something unpredictable enough to feel real. The marriage faded almost as quickly as it began. In less than 2 years it was over. No scandal, no bitterness, just the quiet admission that even love needs roots to grow. And in her life, roots were still hard to find. Every relationship seemed like a house built too close to the tide. Sooner or later the storm came. But if Julia's love life was fragile, her work never wavered. Every film deepened the myth of the woman who could do it all, charm kings, break hearts, win legal battles, lead revolutions. But behind closed doors, Julia's radiance often gave way to exhaustion. She suffered from insomnia. She withdrew from industry parties. She turned down roles that paid tens of millions because she simply didn't have the energy to play pretend, because the truth that fans never saw was this fame had become her cage. She was rich beyond imagination, known around the globe, and yet rarely trusted when she took even one step in the direction of privacy. Strangers thought they owned pieces of her. Cameras were waiting at the gates of every home she rented, every vacation she tried to take. She couldn't walk barefoot outside, or cry in public, or fall apart without it turning into a headline. The world had crowned her a queen, but the crown came with thorns. Still she endured. Because if a childhood full of tension had taught her anything, it was how to smile when it hurt, how to keep walking forward when the ground disappeared beneath you, How to carry pain like silk wrapped around you, part of you beautiful in the light, even if it choked you in the dark. Peace was something Julia Roberts had always reached for like a mirage, visible in the distance, beautiful and still, but always a little out of reach. Until one day it wasn't. In 2000, while filming The Mexican, Julia met cinematographer Danny Motter. He was quiet, steady, unglamorous in the best possible way. He didn't treat her like a trophy or a tabloid sensation. He didn't want her to perform. Instead, he brought something sacred to the chaos. Stillness, but stillness rarely comes without sacrifice. At the time, Danny was married to someone else. Their relationship began under a cloud of scrutiny. Whispers of infidelity, accusations, assumptions. Julia kept silent, refusing to let the media rewrite her story. She knew what people were saying, and she chose not to respond. Because for the first time she wasn't concerned with how things looked. She was concerned with how they felt, and with Danny she felt safe. When his divorce was finalized, Julia and Danny quietly married on July 4, 2002, far from Hollywood in a small ceremony at her Taos, New Mexico ranch. There were no paparazzi, no designer gowns, no spectacle. Just the sound of wind through trees, wild flowers blooming by the altar, and a love that didn't beg to be documented, only lived. For the first time in decades, Julia didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to smile for flashbulbs, or play the role of America's sweetheart. She could just be a woman, bruised, healing, deeply human, holding someone's hand, not for the cameras, but of her own free will. The years that followed were, by Julia's own admission, the most grounded of my life. Within just 2 years of their marriage, she gave birth to twins Phineas and Hazel. 3 years later came their son Henry, and with motherhood, something truly shifted in her spirit. In interviews, she stopped talking about characters and started talking about pancakes. About school runs and scraped knees, and how the most rewarding role she'd ever played was mom. Her Malibu home became a sanctuary, not glamorous or gilded, but real. A kitchen where her kids painted. A hallway filled with handwritten notes and scuffed walls and laughter. She didn't retire, but she stepped back from the urgent, endless rhythm of the film industry. She was still Julia Roberts, still a force, but now she was also someone else, someone who woke up early, made breakfast, held her children close, and realized she no longer needed the world's approval to know her own worth. But time has a way of circling back. In 2014, Julia faced a shadow that no parent, no sibling, no celebrity ever really knows how to prepare for. Her half-sister Nancy Moats passed away by suicide. The loss was catastrophic. And unlike past tragedies, this one came with words Julia couldn't control, heartbreaking letters, public tension, headlines that tried to layer blame on grief. Again she said very little. Not out of avoidance, but out of reverence. Nancy had struggled with addiction for years. She had felt unseen, particularly by her famous sister. Some accused Julia of not doing enough. Others defended her fiercely. In the end, none of it mattered. The pain was personal, profound, and private, as all true grief is. But within it, something reopened in Julia, that old familiar silence, that specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with geography and everything to do with guilt. She made fewer public appearances during those years, worked sparingly, pulled the circle of her life tighter, and even inside her own family, the fractures persisted. Her relationship with her brother Eric had long been distant, once close, once bonded by a shared childhood of hardship and an early pursuit of art. They faded out of each other's lives. Fame had rerouted both their paths, but not always toward each other. Years passed. Children grew. Projects came and went. Julia remained a name, a legend, but no longer someone the world saw every Friday night on a premiere carpet, and that was by design. Because what she needed was never more attention. What she needed and finally began to protect was peace. In time, things softened. Eric Roberts got sober. He reconnected with Julia slowly, gently, not for headlines but for healing. There weren't any grand reunions, viral interviews, or teary Oprah specials. Just small steps. Shared birthdays, texts at odd hours. The kind of hesitant reconnection built not out of nostalgia, but out of effort. Because if Julia's life has taught her anything, it's that silence hurts, but sometimes it also heals. Now at 57, Julia Roberts walks quietly through the life she once begged to have, not for the fame, not for the applause, but for the solitude that now wraps around her like a soft earned blanket. She's no longer racing through airports chased by cameras, no longer walking red carpets just to prove her star still shines. She's done proving. She's done pretending. She has at long last arrived where she's always belonged. Home. Her days now begin not with call sheets but coffee, not with table reads, but the sound of birds outside her window. In her Malibu home, and on the quiet land of her ranch in Taos, Julia has built a sanctuary stitched together not with expensive things, but simple rituals. Yoga in the morning, cooking for her husband and kids, laughing around a fire pit with old friends who remember her before the world did. She still makes movies but only when the story calls to her soul. August Osage County let her pour her past right onto the screen, the echo of fracturing families, of mothers and daughters wading through emotional wreckage. Wonder reminded her of what healing looks like through a mother's eyes. Leave the world behind carried the weight of societal unraveling. Her roles have become mirrors now, not masks. She's not acting to escape anymore. She's acting to exhale. Her face has changed, but not in the way the tabloids like to measure. It has softened, settled, gained the kind of glow that doesn't come from skin treatments or cameras, but from truth. She no longer smiles because she has to. She smiles when something is genuinely funny, when something real reaches into her chest and pulls out joy. That same smile, once mocked as toothy, once airbrushed onto billboards, now belongs to no one but her. Her children are older now. Hazel, Phineas, Henry. They're growing into their own names, their own stories. She shields them from the spotlight like a tiger in silk, gently, but with unwavering strength. She doesn't want their memories filled with flashing bulbs and tabloid lies. She wants them to remember dinners around the table, garlic on their fingers, dishes in the sink, laughter after a rough day. Fame never left her, but she learned how to live ahead of it, not behind it. While other stars chase relevance or immortality, Julia has chosen retreat, not because she's hiding, but because she knows something that so few in her position ever learn, that the most beautiful chapters are often the quietest, and yet even in all this stillness, her grief never truly left. Some sorrows don't fade, they simply become part of you. She still thinks of her father, wonders who she might have been if he'd seen her win an Oscar, hold her babies, build this life. She wishes her sister Nancy had lived to meet her nieces and nephews. There are days she hears her voice in the stillness. Days when the silence of the ranch is too much to bear, even now, but she does bear it. With grace, with grit, with gratitude. The industry might remember her for her movies, her box office numbers, her seismic smile, but those who know Julia, truly know her, remember the woman who once pawned her father's watch to survive, then bought it back years later just to feel close to him again. They remember the girl who stuttered through childhood, silenced by fear, and then taught the world how to feel with just her eyes. They remember the woman who walked away from a wedding the world called a dream, just so she could stay true to herself. And what of her legacy? It isn't just Erin Brockovich, or Pretty Woman, or that unforgettable laugh. Her legacy is the quiet revolution she led, by proving that a woman can be soft and powerful, that tragedy doesn't cancel triumph, that scars do not ruin beauty, they reveal it. She has lived, loved, lost, crawled through grief, climbed into light, and now she teaches us, not through speeches, not through roles, but by simply being. Julia Roberts at 57 is not a legend because of what she accomplished. She is a legend because of what she endured. At the height of her fame it would have been easy to believe she had everything, but the truth is she didn't even have a safe place to fall. Now she does. And maybe that's the greatest miracle of all, that the girl who walked barefoot through snow with holes in her shoes, who slept beside cassette tapes just to hear her father's voice, is finally warm, finally whole.